Welcome to the target stream for Mint Press News. I'm your host, Robert Inlakesh. As always, thank you to everyone for joining us. Trump, once again, backed out of launching what he claimed to be the largest attack since World War II against Iranian civilian infrastructure, as Iran continues to strike U.S. proxy forces in the region. Hezbollah has started responding to Israeli violence in the south of Lebanon. Clashes are occurring between Saudi proxies and Yemen's armed forces, all as you are told to ignore Gaza and focus on how bad Muslims are and how they're invading the West. But before we get into all of that, the target stream is 100% viewer funded. In the last 2 years, we were financially targeted and banned by PayPal and had our fundraisers taken down by Indiegogo and GoFundMe. They even withheld our funds. So we are looking for 300 new members to keep this news show alive. You can join Mint Press on Patreon or right here on YouTube and join our membership program. So there, of course, has been quite a few developments since we were last here looking at Trump, of course, threatening over the weekend. Everyone thought that the final showdown was going to be here. And instead, what we got is Trump again backing down, which is sort of the entire story of this post 40-day war period where there's a lot of back and forth. Suddenly, we think that the war has resumed. There's escalations on different fronts. And yet Trump, at the last minute, chickens out from his threats and decides that he's not going to launch this massive attack on Iranian civilian infrastructure. And so Trump is now saying this is the last warning of his last warnings that Iran has. You know, they need to make up their mind now. They're going to open the Strait of Hormuz, even though Trump says that the Strait of Hormuz is open and the war is going great and that they control the strait and there's no problem there. You know, of course, his words don't mean anything. And the real reason why he's still talking and he's still coming out with what he is at this point, because we know it's nonsense. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't have any implications on the reality on the ground, or in this case, in the sea. He's doing it because he is trying to prop up the prices of oil very clearly. And he's now publicly going out and talking about how they have to lower the price of oil. And of course, if you're to look on the price of Brent crude futures, yes, that price goes down, but the true price of oil is not going down because the supply isn't there. The strategic petroleum reserves of the United States are now at their lowest levels since 1983. So there's the market and the futures, and then there's reality and what actually exists. And of course, Trump is stuck in between a rock and a hard place because on one hand, the Israelis don't want him to stop the war. But on the other hand, if he escalates and does what naturally we all know he sort of has to do if he goes to the next stage, and he's publicly announced it, he's made it very obvious, then Iran is going to fire back at all of the US's Gulf allies, at the Israelis. And it's very clear that the Iranians during this phase of the past months have been looking at strategically targeting US radars, targeting their THAAD and Patriot air defense batteries and systems to take them out. They want to force the United States out of their bases in Jordan. They want to force them out. And we've seen quite a bit of evidence emerging about the US leaving its bases in Bahrain, or clearing out of the bases at the very least, even if it has some troop presence in the area. But the Iranians have succeeded in pushing them out. And we see now, even from Erbil in Iraq, there's a very clear US withdrawal. And we're seeing that. They are actually withdrawing their forces, and this is at the international airport. The US have been based here for years. This was normally a very safe place for US forces, but it's gotten to the point where they cannot sustain it. They're open to constant attack. And that's what we've been seeing, despite the fact that Trump says that he's not going to attack, and Iran has not launched since that time, since the weekend. It's not launched any large-scale attacks using ballistic missiles on U.S. bases in the likes of Jordan or in Bahrain or Kuwait or UAE, etc. What it has been doing is it's been continuing to pound these Kurdish Iranian opposition groups, as they're called. Really what the US wants to do with these organizations, after Trump has admitted publicly to arming them, is to have them invade Iranian territory. And Iran has not been taking any chances with this. Iran's armed forces previously announced that their special forces units had conducted a series of operations, cross-border operations, into Iraqi Kurdistan. Now we've got claims from the Iranian military that there have been at least 26 of these operations that have taken place. And they have taken out high-ranking and middle-ranking militants with those Kurdish opposition groups. And we've also seen they've been smashing those bases. And by the way, the US are there in these facilities. They're striking US facilities. We see these drone attacks that occur. Just pulling this up on screen here. These are the sort of attacks that are constantly ongoing in northern Iraq or Iraqi Kurdistan. We even see the US pulls out its sea to combat the incoming drones, and they're trying to just shoot down anything that's coming in. And then here's footage of an Iranian drone striking a target. And this is all within the past few days that we've been seeing this emerge. And it's nonstop. They're not taking any chances. I think the Iranians understand that if there is any real ground threat, it's going to be these groups. And if they do actually commit to something like that, they're not going to be able to succeed. I think that's very clear. They're going up against mountainous terrain that sort of guards and acts as a natural border for Iranian territory. These Iraqi or Iranian Kurdish groups that are based in Iraq. But the Iranians are not going to sit around and watch that happen. That's very clear. And they've been proactive in combating these forces and hitting US targets in the midst of these strikes. They've been going after Patriot air defense batteries. And of course, there's still the issue of the Iraqi groups, the Islamic resistance in Iraq, that they have not yet responded to Saudi-US strikes that occurred last week, which killed dozens and dozens of their fighters and killed and injured a whole bunch of civilians as well. And they have not forgotten about this. But at this current point, it's very clear that there is an escalation ladder. And as of now, we're seeing those US forces clear out. The US is trying to put pressure on the Iraqi government to disarm those groups inside of Iraq. It's not going to work. The same is happening, pressure on the Lebanese government to, of course, fully normalize ties with the Israelis, accept, permanent Israeli occupation in the south of the country, and to go after Hezbollah and try and disarm it. And of course, there's an initiative as well to disarm the Palestinian resistance. So everyone needs to be disarmed, but Israel doesn't need to be disarmed. Very typical. But with that being said, we'll move on to what's been going on in terms of Yemen and what's been reported about Yemen, because a very interesting admission was made just a day or so ago by Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War. And you would think, for somebody that is supposed to be in this position as the Secretary of War, formerly Secretary of Defense, that he would at least know what fronts of the war are active that he's fighting, right? Because he's giving us all these briefs about how well the United States is doing in its war against Iran. And yet this is what he decided to say publicly. Let's take a listen.
the courage to bomb the Houthis and say we will maintain freedom of navigation. I wonder why they're not involved in this conflict, the Houthis, even though they're a proxy of Iran, because they've felt the weight of American power for 45 days, and you had the courage to do that.
So he's saying they're not involved. Not only were Yemen's Ansar Allah, or the Houthis as he calls them, a proxy of Iran, not only were they involved, they're still involved, and they just openly, actively, they're now striking Saudi oil targets. They've imposed a blockade on Saudi Arabia. Bab el-Mandeb is closed to Saudi Arabia. They have cut off millions of barrels of oil every single day that was coming out from Saudi Arabia. They've eliminated that now. Because of Yemen and their involvement in this conflict, we've now got about, 25% of world oil just offline because they've participated. Of course, the bulk of this is because of Iran, but they have now participated. During the 40-day war period, when the US and Israel started the war by bombing Iran on the 28th of February, later on during that first initial 40-day period, Ansar Allah fired missiles and drones at the Israelis in coordination with Iran. And they continued to do so. And in fact, they openly threatened and were ready to enter full-scale war in the event that Israel bombs Beirut about a month or so ago. So they've been very much involved. But this guy, the Secretary of War, doesn't understand that Yemen is involved in the regional war, which is astounding. And it also speaks to the point that these people don't know what's going on. They're not in control. The Trump administration is not actually in control. All of these people we see, the figureheads there, they're not in control of anything. How could they be? Because if Pete Kegsbreath, if he truly believes that Yemen is not involved in this, how can he be involved in anything? How is he heading up the military? No, this guy is just there simply to talk about how we're going to give testosterone replacement therapy to a bunch of 30-year-olds and people above 30 in the military, as if that's the biggest issue in the world, that we need to, jack up American troops on more steroids. That's the biggest issue. And you need a plan, not anabolic steroids. But that aside, this is just some of the damage from satellite imagery that we have of simply just one of the sites of Ansar Allah, the Yemeni armed forces headed by the Ansar Allah government, their attacks on Saudi oil infrastructure. And they destroyed completely these storage depots. And they were on fire in some cases for about 3 days. They weren't able to get these fires under control. And we're seeing now that there are active clashes inside of Yemen between Ansar Allah, or what people call the Houthi rebels, which is incorrect terminology, but they insist on using this terminology, and I will continue to push back. Ansar Allah is the government of Yemen. There is no internationally recognized government. This does not exist. You no longer have a claim of this, even though they have some random Amu who they signed up in the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Riyadh, right, in 2022 to become the so-called president, the sit-in president of Yemen. He's nobody. He was not elected by the Yemeni people. He's in Saudi Arabia. He's a Saudi proxy, and the so-called internationally recognized government is just a whole bunch of paid Saudi shills. That's what it is. And then there was this unity government, and I do cover this on a lot of episodes, so if you've heard me go over this before, I apologize, but it's important because, again, until the message actually gets received, we have to continue. So this is where the so-called internationally recognized government of Yemen was founded, right? And this right here, Aden, is supposed to be the capital for them. It's where they actually have sort of government buildings and all the rest of it, right? So there was the Sovereign Transitional Council, as it was called, which ceased to exist earlier this year after a flare-up between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. And the Sovereign Transitional Council was, in essence, a proxy organization for the United Arab Emirates, a proxy group for them, right? They even went and they trained forces supporting the STC. The United Arab Emirates brought the Israelis in to train them, right? So that they could have, the expertise to send them back into Yemen and fight against Ansarullah. Like, that's how involved they are with the United Arab Emirates. There was training, of course, as well. They sent forces from Sudan. Surprise, surprise, right? The Saudis used Sudanese forces. The Emiratis, of course, were using the help from their Sudanese militia allies who were accused of committing genocide in order to fight against Yemen, where they were committing another genocide because Saudi and its coalition imposed a blockade on Yemen. Since 2015 until now, there's over 400,000 people that have died inside of Yemen. And again, people were calling this a genocide because they were blockading everything from getting in. People were starving to death. This was happening for years. And now Yemen has done the same back to them. They've imposed the same conditions back on them. But this so-called STC, which is the UAE proxy, which for years you would have to, if you're somebody like me, you would have to argue with these people who would sit there and tell you that the STC is a organic movement inside of Yemen and that it will fight for, for its territory and all of the rest of this, even if the UAE ran away. And exactly what people who were making the argument, exactly that, what we said was going to happen, happened. They just dissipated. Now these guys, the forces that were loyal to them, are suddenly popping up again. We're hearing statements here and there from these guys, and they're wanting to fight against Ansarullah. Why? Because Saudi Arabia is making friends with UAE again, and Saudi Arabia now has to fight, and they're preparing to commit to an offensive. And now we're waiting to see what happens because, of course, there's been a general mobilization of Ansarullah's forces, the Yemeni armed forces, and they are looking to fight back against the Saudi proxies and UAE proxies inside of the country, but mainly the Saudi proxies, right? They have the biggest presence at the moment. The UAE sort of got pushed out. Not to say it's not involved. It still, of course, is involved. But that's the Yemen front. They continue to threaten the Saudis. They continue to blockade the Saudis. And the Saudis need some sort of solution because bombing Yemen, you're not going to do anything. The United States bombed Yemen, like Hegseth claimed. You were bombing them for 45 days, and because of that, they're not involved. Well, they're very much involved. But that reference to the Operation Rough Riders that was committed in 2025, that operation achieved nothing at all. Waste of billions of dollars of U.S. Taxpayer dollars. Complete waste. Achieved absolutely nothing. Now Yemen has better missiles. It has better drones. And it is willing and ready and threatening to fight back against Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has apparently got the green light from Trump to go ahead. Trump is possibly threatening to possibly get involved in Yemen directly, once again, wasting more resources and more money for no reason, and will get no benefit whatsoever. And the operation that Trump launched against Yemen, which went after, they just started bombing all civilian targets at the end because just openly, they didn't have any military targets to even go after. So they just went after infrastructure and civilian buildings. They were just bombing everything. There was like a tribal meeting and they called it a meeting of leaders. And they released footage of this drone strike that they committed. And it was very clearly just a bunch of random Yemenis who were together dancing, right? But that being said, there's, of course, the United States. They're trying to get out of the fact that the Strait of Hormuz is closed. They're trying to make excuses. And this is some footage from one of the tankers that Iran took out recently. And it's continued to strike at tankers that try and violate the naval blockade. Because, of course, Trump also has imposed his own blockade on Iran's blockade, as if that helps somehow. And, of course, it doesn't help. And Iran can most certainly outlast the United States when it comes down to this kind of a conflict. This is something that they're very much prepared for. So that being said, there's another development, and a lot of people have been talking about this, and this leads into how the region is set to escalate across different fronts. We haven't spoken that much, although I tried to mention it each time, about Gaza and what has been happening in the Gaza Strip recently. Some people were surprised to hear that Hamas had agreed, and all the other Palestinian resistance factions had agreed to a deal which would eventually forfeit their weapons. And so I'm going to explain exactly what this was. I actually did share my thoughts briefly about this, but I will get into more details. So Hamas had set forward a plan, and it was accepted by the so-called Board of Peace, which Trump supposedly runs. More on that in a minute. But Trump's Board of Peace that the United Nations created as its own replacement, that is accountable to nobody and wants to pass a bill that will enable all of not only its members, but anyone affiliated or working with it for them to have a get out of jail free card. They can do whatever they want in Gaza and they can't be held legally liable. But this Board of Peace okayed a plan that Hamas signed on to, and that would mean that in phases, Hamas would relinquish its weapons. It would store them initially, and it would decommission those weapons. It's heavy weapons anyway. When it comes to, and when they say heavy weapons, Hamas doesn't really have truly any heavy weapons, to be honest with you. Hamas doesn't have tanks or anything like that. So, heavy weapons, I suppose, by the standards of what the Gaza Strip has. So rockets and maybe drones, I guess. Maybe that's what they define as heavy weapons. Regardless, there would be a process that they agreed to. And in this agreement that was the text of which was published publicly, they said that Hamas first, its police forces would relinquish their weapons to this new committee, which has been set up to take over the Gaza Strip, which again, Hamas agreed to allow for a full takeover of a non-aligned Palestinian committee to run the Gaza Strip, the civil administration, and that they would do that. Israel would, at the same time, simultaneously, as Hamas is conducting, obviously, like surveys, they're doing an inventory of their weapons, and they're slowly identifying them, and they begin to store them. Israel would withdraw fully from the Gaza Strip, and Israel would disband the 5 militia groups it's created, the ISIS-linked militia groups it's created in Gaza. And we would see that as well, there would be an initiative for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. So that was, and eventually Hamas and the other factions said that they'll hand their weapons over to a Palestinian state, right? The armed forces of a Palestinian state. As soon as this agreement was agreed to, because of course this is actually Hamas, right? There's a process by which they will relinquish their weapons, but this is a disarmament plan. And it goes beyond anything they've previously agreed to. The second they did this, I told everyone who came to me to ask me this question, discard this. Because Israel was not going to allow this to happen. And lo and behold, of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu, he says that they won't withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Surprise, 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 surprise. They're not going to withdraw from the Gaza Strip. So they got what they wanted. How many months has it been now since they announced the Gaza ceasefire was going into phase 2? I think they formally announced sometime in January. So between now and January, right? It's been, 7 months roughly. It's been about 7 months or 6.5, whatever, that we've been waiting for phase 2 to actually start when they announced it. And phase 2 was supposed to start straight after the prisoner exchange in phase 1 of the Gaza ceasefire agreement, which started back in October of last year. What was I saying back in October of last year? I said exactly what was going to happen and has happened this entire time. We're going to be stuck between phase 1 and phase 2, and that's exactly what's happened. There are no real proposals for reconstruction in the Gaza Strip. And the reason why there's no proposals for reconstruction in the Gaza Strip is simple. Israel, throughout the entirety of the ceasefire, has been continuing to destroy buildings throughout the Gaza Strip. That's the main thing it's done throughout the entirety of the genocide, is destroy civilian buildings in the Gaza Strip. So why, after continuing every single day, day in, day out, to destroy more people's homes, to take out more farmland, to poison more land, to pour more money into these ISIS-linked militia groups that it controls inside of the Gaza Strip? And if we just take a look at the map, why, if it had any genuine intent, there's the yellow line there that you can see. This is how far Israel has gone past that yellow line. Israel was supposed to have withdrawn from even further deep into the Gaza Strip. The yellow line, it keeps expanding forward, and this yellow line is actually deeper into the Gaza Strip than it initially should have been. So they keep taking more territory. They keep destroying more buildings. They have killed over 1,200 people in the Gaza Strip, including, I think, around 500 children since the so-called ceasefire came into effect. Why in the world would they allow reconstruction? They were never going to do it. And this is an important point to mention, because when people talk about Hamas and how bad it is and how it can never control the Gaza Strip, Hamas didn't want to control the Gaza Strip. This is something as well that people, they cannot get through their heads, because they don't understand the history of the conflict. Because we talk about, let's just blame Hamas for everything, as if it's, either Israel controls fully Hamas, and therefore, like, Hamas is a bad actor because it somehow controls it 100%. Hamas was caught in a situation where it was forced, basically, or pushed towards running an election in 2006 and the British played a big role in trying to push, and the Bush administration also wanted it. The Saudis wanted Hamas to run in elections when Hamas previously had rejected the Palestinian Authority legislative and presidential elections. The likes of Ahmed Yassin and others had opposed it because they saw it as, legitimizing the occupation. They didn't want to legitimize what are called the Oslo Accords, right, which they opposed, which were signed 1993, 1995. Hamas were against that. They were for armed struggle. So they were against that. Then they were pushed, again, by the West and its Gulf allies. They were pushed into doing an election and ran on the ticket of change, right, and reform. They wanted to run on the platform of bettering and ending the corruption of the Fatah party in Palestine, the way it had run the Palestinian Authority. Keep in mind, there's also the Second Intifada that is at its tail end. The former leader and president of the Palestinian Authority, Yasser Arafat, has passed away. All of these things have happened, which are, changing the dynamics inside of Palestine. Israel, of course, has gone on its killing sprees in the West Bank, has crushed the resistance forces in the West Bank, has gone in and reformed and changed the Palestinian Authority security forces. And Hamas is now there, that party that somehow hung on in Gaza, and its armed resistance wasn't fully crushed. They managed to actually fight back And even though they suffered massive losses, they stayed there. There was still an armed resistance, and they started developing rockets. Couldn't go very far at first, but they kept fighting. So they get pushed into the elections. They win the elections in a landslide. And then, of course, the West rejects this. So the European Union placed sanctions upon the Gaza Strip, and the US instantly sanctioned. The Israelis, of course, are never going to accept it. The Israelis withdrew a year before, and then they use this as an opportunity to reinforce the siege. And in 2007, and keep in mind, people like Hillary Clinton said we should have fixed the elections in Palestine. Pro-democracy people, right? Fixing elections is pro-democracy, right? Hillary Clinton. And we know this because of the WikiLeaks documents that came out. She openly spoke about this, and others as well. Others in the US government had talked about fixing, that they should have fixed the elections, the Palestinian legislative elections. All of this is very important to understand, right? This tiny little strip of land and everything that's going on here, so that people can explain this if anyone ever asks you to explain the position of Hamas and, oh, why didn't it just hand over its weapons? Why didn't it do this? Why didn't it do that? So Hamas won those elections. Immediately, it was never given legitimacy because the Palestinian Authority, based in Ramallah inside of the West Bank, right? Maybe we should pull up a map here. It might make this a little bit easier as well, just in case. Sure, everyone knows where Palestine is and what it looks like, but it's always good to have like that representation here. And of course, if you go on the Google Maps, right, this is the word they use to describe Palestine. But the Palestinian Authority, which is run out of Ramallah, right, was never going to accept the situation where Hamas run the Palestinian Authority, and they were the only ones. A specific faction of the Fatah party in Palestine, that is the only faction that the Israelis and the Americans have been okay with running any sort of Palestinian semi-autonomous body, right? Which was supposed to be set up as sort of the precursor to a state, right? A real government inside of Palestine. And this is what's got recognition at the UN, by the way, and that's why they recognize the authority that's based in Ramallah, which only really now has partial, very, very partial control over the West Bank. But they know that it's going to be bad for them if they accept Hamas and they accept Ismail Haniyeh, who Israel assassinated in Tehran, for example, to be the Palestinian prime minister. They don't want that to happen. They're not willing to share power with Hamas. And so there's a figure who is called Hamad Dahlan, who the United States the Bush administration tasked with doing a coup against Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So Dahlan had all this money. They funneled weapons on the black market through to him. And at the time, he was the head of the Palestinian Authority's security agency, the preventative security. He later had a dispute with the now unelected president of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, and he would be exiled. And he's sort of this guy, by the way, who did the coup plot on behalf of the Bush administration to remove Hamas from power in the Gaza Strip, now heads up UAE's security apparatus. He is now responsible in many arenas on a less official level for sort of managing UAE intelligence. That's what his role is now. He's UAE's guy. And he's there, and he lives there, right? He resides there now. So Dahlan, who's actually, he's from Gaza originally, he failed because Hamas discovered that the coup plot was a go and preempted it and killed it. And we know that there was a coup plot and that the United States was funneling in these weapons and that the Israelis was aware of it because we had afterwards documents leaked about this. And there was a very big story that emerged that covered this, that went into all of the details. If you want to know more about what happened there. So Hamas preempts this, and then Israel goes in 2007 when this happened. Israel goes, okay, we're going to double down on our blockade, and we're going to enforce a more tight siege on the Gaza Strip. So here Hamas are, having won an election that they weren't prepared for in a landslide, being pushed out of power by the Palestinian Authority run in Ramallah, that are scared that their European Union backers and their US allies and their friends in Jordan are going to be pissed off at them. They're afraid that Israel, which controls the tax revenue, releasing the tax revenue to the Palestinian Authority so it can function, Israel will stop that because of Hamas, because Hamas endorses armed resistance, whereas the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is opposed to the armed struggle. It is opposed to violence, right? It only says that it wants to pursue non-violent resistance against the Israelis, okay? That's its stance. So it doesn't want to do that, doesn't want to run out of its funds, and so it engages in this clash. And so Hamas and Fatah, because there's lots of members of the Fatah party in the Gaza Strip, engage in what's known as the Palestinian Civil War. And that happens. And Israel thinks that's great. Palestinians killing each other, that's a wonderful thing. Look what's just been caused here, okay? Now, you can be the judge of what you think in that situation, who's responsible for what here. But if you actually understand what just happened and you understand what I've just explained here about what occurred in Gaza and the process by which Hamas took power in the Gaza Strip, if you actually understand that, how are you blaming solely Hamas for this? That doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But people want to do it because they're afraid to actually speak truth to power about what Hamas is. Now, people will go, Hamas has this horrible charter and all of the rest of that. I'm not going to get all into the entire history of Hamas. But, right, the former leadership, I should actually say, of Hamas that took power. So there's a man, which you'll all know, named Yahya Sinwar, who took over the Gaza Strip in 2017. So what happened in 2017 that we should know about Hamas? So Hamas in 2017, they put out what's called their new charter. It's more of an actual official charter rather than the formational document, which is often cited out of context, which was not a representation of the majority of their positions. But regardless, nobody cares about history. It's just propaganda that they care about. This document came out, again, Middle East Eye here, they've covered it, and they've got the entire document, right, which you can go through. They condemn anti-Semitism in this document. They also say that they're open to a two-state solution, right? This is something that's in 2017, and Yahya Sinwar here, Haniya next to him, and then Khalil al-Hayya is here. He's now currently the elected leader of Hamas. But Yahya Sinwar, who came into power in Hamas in 2017, suddenly we have this new charter. And then suddenly, by November, Hamas handed over control to the Palestinian Authority of the Rafah crossing between Gaza and Egypt, and signed an agreement with the Palestinian Authority, which was supposed to lead to the PA, which operates out of Ramallah in the West Bank, taking over the civil administration in Gaza. That happened in 2017. So a new charter condemning anti-Semitism, and they also say that they're open to a two-state solution. They tried to hand over control of the civil administration in 2017, and they want to do resistance, similar to what is the case in Lebanon with Hezbollah, perhaps. They weren't going to give up their weapons, but they wanted to hand over control of the civil administration because they're under sanction. They're under siege. By this point, they're 3 years away from the UN experts' deadline, which they said will be the point where Gaza will be at a point of no return and will be completely unlivable. They have 97% of the water is completely, it's undrinkable. It's unfit for human consumption. One of the highest unemployment rates in the world. These periodic massacres that are carried out against their civilian population, they're trying to hand over control to the Palestinian Authority. But who does that? Of course, the United States doesn't want that, and the Israelis don't want that, because suddenly the Palestinian Authority, based in Ramallah, has control over Gaza now as well, the civil administration. So, imposing a siege on them, that doesn't look too good, does it? And also, another part of this is, now the Palestinian Authority can claim that it has control over both of those territories, Gaza and West Bank, and they didn't want that, so they deaded it. Okay? What else happened in that year? Very busy year. So that same year, because of the constraints, of course, Israel restricts the return of tax revenues to the Palestinian Authority, right? Because of these constraints, what also happened this year, the Palestinian Authority started slashing salaries for its Gaza employees. Now, like I said earlier, there were members of Fatah, people who were previously part of the Palestinian Authority, who were in the Gaza Strip, and these people depended upon a salary that was provided to them from the Palestinian Authority based in Ramallah. So this was like their livelihood. They got a salary from the PA. And suddenly they started slashing these salaries, and they slashed them more and more and more. And of course, this put more pressure on Hamas, and the situation in the Gaza Strip started to boil up more. So then the next year, you have the Great Return March, which Hamas engages in. It tried to hand over control of the Gaza Strip, being under sanction the entire time. It tried to hand over control of Gaza. It also tried to do a unity agreement in 2014, which was second to the actual full-scale genocide, was the worst civilian massacre, way over 2,000 civilians killed by Israel in 2014. The whole reason for that is because Hamas was trying to do a deal with the Palestinian Authority, and suddenly the Israelis got a perfect excuse. A bunch of Israelis go missing in the West Bank, which has nothing to do with Gaza, and suddenly they have an excuse to go in and kill thousands of people in the Gaza Strip and threaten the PA, and the US, of course, stumps its foot, and the Palestinian Authority, runs behind a wall, scurries away, and no longer wants to do the unity agreement with Hamas because it doesn't want to endorse armed struggle, right? Because again, it's going to anger its allies. And it's put itself in this position where its forces, its security forces, who used to actually, under Arafat, he got them to form certain resistance cells and stuff like this, right? That couldn't happen anymore. The Israelis and the Americans were not having it. The Jordanians were not having it. And so that Palestinian security force had to become a collaborator force, which did security coordination with the Israelis, protect the settlers, protect the Israeli soldiers, protect the settlements, make sure nobody, Palestinians does anything, right, to attack the Israelis in the West Bank. So that's going on. That was done away with. 2014, they get a massacre, a massive civilian massacre. In 2017, they changed their charter. They say they want to accept a two-state solution. They say that they're condemning anti-Semitism, right? They want to hand over control of the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority. And what does the U.S. say? No. What do the Israelis say? No. Then you have the Great March of Return. Okay? And these are not even the final statistics, by the way, because it went on longer than this. But these are some initial statistics that were provided, right? I think it was over 300 people in total that were killed, right? 30,000 people wounded. A series of non-violent protests. Okay? The Israelis were not dying at this time. That's why the media didn't bother covering it. And when they did, they said that the Palestinians were going to a border and threatening Israel's security. And Israel had the right to defend itself and kill 266 nonviolent protesters and injure around 30,000 people, including people that were wounded and have life-changing injuries that, this was an enormous series of mass casualty events. And they were completely ignored. And guess who endorsed the Great March of Return? And people, again, they don't like it when you say this, unfortunately, but it's true. Hamas endorsed it. Not only did Hamas endorse the Great March of Return, this is just true because Hamas was the government there. Not only did they endorse it, they stopped firing at Israel throughout that entire period until the Israelis decided that they would try and kidnap a commander in Hamas, in the Qassam brigades, in the armed wing of Hamas. When they did that, that opened something else, and that was in November of 2018, I believe. But between the start of a Great Return March and that Israeli mission where they tried to kidnap a commander in Hamas, Hamas didn't fire any rockets back. Israel would bomb their sites. Israel even killed members of Hamas. Like it was committing these strikes. It was shooting people on a daily basis, assassinating people left, right, and center. It was bombing agricultural lands. And Hamas stayed silent. They didn't do anything. Instead, they endorsed the Great Return March. So they tried to give control away of the Gaza Strip. They condemned anti-Semitism. They said that they were willing to endorse nonviolent struggle. And what happened every single time they did one of these things? More Palestinians were killed. More Palestinians suffered. The blockade gets tightened and tightened on them. And then we turn around and we go, oh, why did they behave this way? Why did they act this way? And why am I saying this right now? Why am I saying this? Because if we wanted to look at what's happened now, so that agreement, the Hamas agreeing to disarm, right, and all of that, they agreed. They did the agreement with the Board of Peace. The Board of Peace. They did their agreement with them. And suddenly, Israel goes to the Board of Peace. No, we're not going to withdraw from Gaza. Hamas fully disarms. There's no roadmap. There's nothing. We don't care about that. Hamas is going to give up its weapons to us. The Board of Peace is going to be directly involved in disarmament of Hamas. The Palestinians don't get to choose what they do with their weapons. And of course, Trump's Board of Peace reassured the Israelis, oh, no, precious master, please, don't know, you misinterpreted our words. No, we weren't saying that you had to withdraw from Gaza. Of course not. Hamas has to do everything. We're going to do everything you love and you like because we're the Board of Peace. So this is where we're at, okay? And I'm mocking them, but it's a very serious situation that Gaza is in. And where will it lead? Because Israel won't accept Hamas backing out of governing Gaza. They don't want to accept the way that is going to have to be done. They don't want to accept Hamas disarmament unless Hamas just literally give up all their weapons to them. They don't want to accept that. So if they're not going to accept any of that, they're not going to accept reconstruction to even be an option to be considered. And the so-called Board of Peace, Trump's Board of Peace, which is a bunch of Israel firsters, right? They were like, oh, please, Israel, we'll do anything to please you. We'll kiss your toes, right? These people, the Board of Peace people, and the guy who's supposed to be the director of Gaza, some UAE stooge who's, worked with or is a honorary member of the pro-Israel think tank, not the Project for a New American Century. I'm stumbling here, but regardless, it will come back to me. But what's going to happen? What's going to be the inevitable conclusion of this? If nothing can happen, people keep dying. People don't have access to clean water. People are not having even new tents, right? A fraction, I believe I got a document earlier which was detailing how much of the aid is getting in that was supposed to come in that was agreed upon, the aid trucks. And it's something in 35% or something like that of the agreed upon aid that has actually come into the Gaza Strip. So what's going to happen? They keep killing people, more and more people. They keep assassinating people. They keep backing their ISIS-linked gangs in the territory. They keep taking more territory over. They keep destroying more civilian buildings. What is going to happen? Well, we saw what happened when Hamas last time. They had an unlivable territory. They tried nonviolent struggle. They tried to give over the Gaza Strip to the Palestinian Authority, right? They tried saying that they'll do a two-state solution and condemning anti-Semitism. They tried that. So what's going to happen this time after the genocide? You can come to your own conclusions about what might happen, especially if the war is to escalate on other fronts. And the Israelis are guaranteeing that there will be a catastrophic collapse of their regime because of what they're doing to everyone in these territories. If you look in Lebanon, again, this is the territory that they're actually in. This is the yellow line that you're seeing there, and the blue is sort of the territory where they've been mapped out, where they have some sort of presence. I'd argue it's even less than this, but this is a sort of rough map which shows where they're operating, and they refuse to withdraw from Lebanese territory, of course. So are Hezbollah in Lebanon going to accept this and do nothing after about 10,000 people were killed in Lebanon since 2023, since October 7, 2023? About 10,000 people were killed in Lebanon. Okay. In the Gaza Strip, the official numbers are over 70,000, but we know they're much higher. What do you think is going to reasonably happen? Now, what's recently been happening, by the way, this is an update that is important to mention, is we covered that a IED was detonated on an Israeli force that blew up one of their military vehicles in our last episode here. But again, the Israelis have been suffering more casualties at the hands of Hezbollah fighters in the Ali Tahir area. So, of course, the Israelis, they say, oh, they're moderately hurt, right? They're not going to properly admit any losses, so we can forget that. But these IEDs keep exploding, and they're using drones, and sometimes they're clashing with and taking out Israeli soldiers. And we're hearing these reports here and there. That there was a phase like this that happened before we saw a massive escalation of the FPV drone operations earlier this year. So we should probably anticipate that this is going to, of course, escalate again here. But the Israelis, so the Israelis, apparently this morning, there was a report that they bombed Lebanese soldiers because they did this as well last week. They bombed a bunch of Lebanese, or fired at them, Lebanese soldiers, and injured a bunch of them. Now they're claiming that Hezbollah is responsible. So the Lebanese armed forces, controlled by a US proxy government, they reported that a blast struck their vehicle, and the Lebanese armed forces, as they report here, initially blamed the Israelis for the attack. But then suddenly, Humpty Dumpty, Joseph Aoun, called them up and said, "Oh no! My master Netanyahu said that it's actually Hezbollah, and this is more of a reason why we need to do a civil war." And so, of course, the Lebanese armed forces walked that back and said, "Oh no, actually, the blast was caused by a so-called suspicious object." And of course, the Israelis came out afterwards and said, "Oh, I know what the suspicious object is. We've just done a review of a claimed airstrike that we committed, and we actually concluded, of course, that it's our enemies that did it." Because, of course, the Israelis would never bomb the Lebanese army. Of course, I'm being sarcastic here. They've bombed the Lebanese army repeatedly, killed, assassinated generals, all of this. And of course, the so-called Lebanese government does not care one bit about this. They just don't do anything. They don't even have a comment. They have no opinions of their own. Talking about no opinions of their own, before we go a little bit further into this issue, there's an interesting clip that I wanted to take a look at of Marco Rubio. And I suppose this is one of those times and those reasons where Donald Trump is actually a good thing, because sometimes he just says, he just comes out with the truth and reveals their nonsense propaganda. And it's sort of nice, actually, because, you know, you wouldn't get that during the Biden administration. They're a lot more well put together. So if you hear these propaganda talking points, no way someone's going to be sitting next to them, you know, let alone Biden. I mean, Biden at that point probably couldn't, you know, remember anything, you know, what he ate in the morning, let alone be able to, you know, dispute someone at that point when he was president. And the Israelis like this, of course. The Israelis like vegetables and people who are incompetent in positions of power, because then, you know, you just got these talking heads. But it's good for us, good entertainment. So we'll take a look at this.
So just a couple points that we all know. We've followed in the news, obviously, the events in the Middle East, and others here can talk about that. Not that they're not important, but there's some other issues happening around the world, Mr. President, that you've shown great leadership in that have not gotten nearly as much attention. I think they deserve to mention today. The first is the International Criminal Court is an illegitimate international organization that, frankly, illegitimate. They've made themselves illegitimate because they claim that even if you're not a member of that court, they can come after you. And what that literally means in the future is that American servicemen, political leaders, and others could find themselves under indictment by this International Criminal Court.
See how he's laying out this big, long argument about how it's affecting Americans and how, you know, the U.S., its attack, its sanctioning of officials at the International Criminal Court, and it pressuring these countries to withdraw. It's all because of Americans. And he's got this big script that obviously AIPAC prepared for him, that he's reading about all of this. Like, he's this big, long script.
I want to know a little bit about it. Jack Smith used to work there. These are the people who think they can go out and basically indict any world leader and haul them into The Hague. So we tried to get them to reform and listen to us. They wouldn't do it. They're very arrogant. We've now begun an effort to really try to bring that court to heel.
By the way, there's no information that they're after me. It could happen. But just so you know, because you're talking about it, I'm saying that means that maybe he's not trying to defend me. He is trying to defend Bibi and various other people. But there are many people that shouldn't be looked at that way. But there is no indication that I'm one of them.
See how he just admits it? He lets the cat out of the bag here. And this is, again, this is the perhaps the only good thing about the Trump administration is he says stuff like this, right? We're going in there, we're going to take the oil, we're only there for the oil. And he says stuff like this all the time. But it's just like those talking points, right? They're obviously, Rubio's made this complex argument about why it is that they need to take out and destroy the International Criminal Court. And then when it comes to Trump, Trump's just like, yeah, it's all for Israel. Openly. Because of course that's what it is. So at this time we have a board of peace because Israel doesn't like the United Nations. Israel doesn't want to deal with the United Nations. Israel will make the head of the United Nations persona non grata. Israel will, rail against the entire UN system, which is what they always claim is their birth certificate, is literally a UN General Assembly resolution. That's what they claim is their legitimacy and gives them the so-called right to exist, is from the UN. And then they go and fire back at the UN. And then they talk about all of this nonsense. And it's like, but the Holocaust and all of this. And they use all of that stuff. And it's like, okay, but all of these laws, having the, human rights as a concept, the Geneva Conventions, right? Like all of the current legal system that we have today is a product of the post-World War II era. And part of that, and a part of all these institutions and what you hear them say all of the time and talk about is the way that Jews were treated in the Second World War and what happened under the Nazis and all of the rest of it, and that we should stop all of this that happened in the Second World War. And in order to commit another genocide, because obviously committing something that is described in these UN documents is objectively wrong and that we should stop it, like in order to commit that, you have to say that the whole UN system is nonsense. Well, okay, if the whole UN system is nonsense, then your birth certificate and your right to exist is nonsense too. You don't have a right to exist. You don't have any legitimacy. There is nothing there. So like if we're going to discard of international law and we're going to discard of the United Nations and we're going to have this so-called stupid board of peace and we're going to go back to the colonial era, then you don't have a right to exist. You don't get to claim that. And I don't think anybody thinks about the implications of destroying the International Criminal Court, regardless of whether Karim Khan, who was the prosecutor who was just pushed out in an unprecedented manner, really, and because of Israel. Like when Karim Khan of the ICC issued the arrest warrants against Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant, his then defense minister, and free officials from Hamas. So 2 Israelis free Palestinians. So it was actually disproportionately targeting Palestinians, not Israelis, for these arrest warrants. But because that happened, of course, Netanyahu came out and said, it's you who should be scared to the prosecutor. And then you have Rubio out here, you know, saying his little bit and doing his AIPAC dance. And I think everyone has seen through this because that whole entire system that was built after World War II is collapsing. It's imploding. And you have like all of these human rights organizations as well. And what their positions are, they're now under pressure themselves because the entire world order is changing. Now it's an in-your-face law of the jungle. They don't care about international law. They couldn't give a damn about the Rome Statute, which governs the International Criminal Court or the International Court of Justice. Israel could get found guilty of genocide at the International Court of Justice, which is the legal organ of the United States. It wouldn't make a difference at all. None. Because we've now shifted. It's now law of the jungle. So when people present you this nonsense and these arguments that Israel gives about its right to exist based upon a UN General Assembly resolution, well, that's null and void. That's not a justification. Because if the old system is dead, that's not a justification anymore. You want to LARP on about human rights and international law and all of that stuff, and Hamas are so bad because of X, Y, Z. Well, the new world is the law of the jungle. There's no such thing as disproportionate force anymore. We don't care about genocide. We don't punish war criminals. We don't do any. We don't even give the veneer of civility that we're going to do anything about it. We just have a board of peace that just the Israelis call them up and get, yeah, we don't like that. And a bunch of people like this settler we saw before. I'm sure many people have seen the video going around of this settler who comes out and says, you know, one Jewish life is worth 10 million Palestinian lives. And hey, that's what they think. So if we're going to go by law of the jungle, we're going to go by law of the jungle. And if you want to go and you want to assess this, well, put aside all of this stuff then. And let's just look at the historical record and right and wrong. And if you look at the historical record, every single time, who is being pushed towards escalating? It's very obvious. And now they want you to think about Muslims. This is the whole thing. This is part of the reason why I'm going into the explanation about Hamas as an organization, because Israel's last little trick up its sleeve, and it mainly works with right-wing people, not left-wing people, as we see with in the United States, in the Democratic Party, overwhelmingly pro-Palestinian. It's not even a competition anymore. There's not even a question about it. But when it comes to the right, they still think they can target them with this nonsense about Muslims. And so we're seeing this everywhere now. We're seeing it on, Joe Rogan podcast. We're seeing and these people that call themselves alternative media people, like Tommy Robinson. Like all these people get funded and found by the exact same people, They're all getting money from the same places. They all have connections, including Pete Hegseth, by the way, the current Minister of War of the United States, or Secretary of War, sorry. They all have ties to the same exact groups. The David Horowitz Freedom Center, for example, that helped all of these figures. Like if you think about anyone in the right, who founded them? Who came and picked them out? Whether it be Ben Shapiro, Laura Loomer, even, and she admitted this, Candace Owens originally was found by David Horowitz and his David Horowitz Freedom Center. Anyone, Charlie Kirk, Charlie Kirk, when David Horowitz passed away last year, wrote something about how if it wasn't for him, TPUSA and he and his activism could never work. It would never have been what it was. All these people go back to the same circles. And who was David Horowitz and the David Horowitz Freedom Center? Was like the epicenter of the most radical Zionist nonsense. And David Horowitz started off arguing, of course, against, Black people. That was his big thing. But then the war on terror came around, and suddenly it's all, we're going to go, against Muslims. And he would go to university campuses and do all the arguing against Muslims nonsense after 9/11 to drum up support for the war on terror. And then, all these proteges would come along, and all these people that we now call independent media that just happen to have millions and millions behind all of these people when they pop up out of nowhere. And their videos start going viral of them debating people, like students that are incapable of actually contesting any of their ideas, and they just speak fast, like Ben Shapiro, right? Like all of this nonsense. And these people don't have to be too intelligent. And you see, whenever they get pushed, they have to run away and hide, and they can't properly debate. But it's all of these people, and then you're more extreme nonsense people like Tommy Robinson, right, who are just taking a big fat check from these Zionists, and now it's on overdrive because we need to whip back up all that post 9/11 hatred of Muslims. So now we need to talk about the grooming gangs in the United Kingdom, the Pakistani Muslim grooming gangs in the United States. We need to talk about that. Something that was a story in like 2012, right? Horrible, all of that stuff happening. It doesn't matter about anything else, but we got to target anything. Just let's pick a random case of like female genital mutilation in Africa. Let's pick that and focus on that. Oh, that's a regional practice that's done by people, also majority Christians in that area. Ignore that because a bunch of Muslims did this stuff, and Muslims are horrible. And then with the grooming gangs, it was all. I heard somebody recently say, one of these morons, recently talking. Supposedly, this person is, an expert on and there was some sort of investigation into the grooming gangs that they did and exposed all of these ridiculous numbers. I was like, oh, the Muslims believe that they can take advantage of white women because there was a hadith that said this, right? Hadith is a saying of the Prophet, right? This is what hadith means, okay? So this is just nonsense, but they just say it publicly because the idea even of white, right? And using white as a concept, like the idea of race as we see it today, didn't exist 1400 years ago. There's literally no way that was even possible. You can go again, literally just go onto Google, go ask any AI engine you want, and go ask. Go on, just do a basic search, and you're going to see that all of this race science stuff was all of these philologists that came up with the idea of Semitism, right? For example, which is sort of a language class of people. It's a specialized way that they did because they wanted to class Jews as something else. So they classed them together with Arabs and Armenians and different groups of people, right, that were speaking different language. People who spoke Aramaic. So all of this stuff, it's like created by the British, and the French were involved, the Germans. This is new. Like, this is not 1400 years old, the idea of whiteness, right, opposed to being black or Arab, or like these concepts. Like racism and race science, right, this junk science that was created is a new thing. But again, like this concept, nobody knows anything about it or anything about Islamic history, nothing about what the Muslim world gave to the West, and nothing about the fact that the Muslim world was a part of the West and a part of the expansion of the West, of Western culture. I mean, in the regions which later became the Muslim world, like Egypt and Iraq, This is where Western civilization started. And then, of course, it went to Greece, right? And, you had the Romans that ruled the area. And then, of course, the Muslims eventually came. And, for a while, it was centered in different parts of what became the Muslim world. But they don't want you to know anything about this. They don't want you to know about, modern medicine, and they don't want you to, like, who created that. They don't want you to know anything about this stuff. Like, they're just weird brown people over there that do weird brown people stuff, and they hate white people. And they have to make it race-based as well, because they don't have an argument. They don't know anything about the religion. And then, to link it back to Hamas and the Israelis go, well, what's the scariest thing for Western right-wing people? And they think, 9/11, right? And ISIS. That's what they think is the scariest thing in the world, even though Israel has killed way more people than ISIS or Al-Qaeda ever could have hoped to have killed, right? Maybe if they had the same technology, maybe they would be up there. I don't know. But Israel, much more proficient in killing children and butchering people and beheading people than ISIS and Al-Qaeda could ever hope to be. But that being said, that's the thing that scares everyone. So why is it then that Donald Trump, like all these people, they love Trump, they defend Trump. Why is it then Donald Trump is happy about bragging about he put the former head of Al-Qaeda in Syria in control of the Syrian government? Why? And all these people that do these attacks, that believe in this ideology, this Wahhabi ideology, really, and more than anything want to kill other Muslims, and historically have killed other Muslims more than anyone else. But these people who are like the worst example of like the murderous, extreme Muslims that they want to sort of paint every single Muslim as to distract you and make you hate Muslims. And then if you hate Muslims, then you have to, hate Palestinians, because the majority of them, not all of them, of course, the Christians are also being equally oppressed, but you have to agree with bombing and killing the Muslims, because Al-Qaeda is like Hamas and ISIS is like Hamas. But if you actually look into it, well, Israel's backing ISIS, like former ISIS militants and Al-Qaeda militants in its 5 different proxy organizations in the Gaza Strip to attack and kill Hamas because they accuse them of not being Muslim. And there's a long history of Hamas actually fighting against Al-Qaeda inside of the Gaza Strip and clashing with them, having battles with them, and eliminating ISIS when it reared its head inside of the Gaza Strip. They don't want you to know that, of course, but but who is behind all of these groups? Well, you have to go back to the start, don't you? Because in 79, the CIA and MI6 decided, we're going to start backing our own Muslim militants. And the reason they did this, of course, is because their big enemy at that time was the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union, of course, took over Afghanistan. So then they were like, well, we're going to bring a whole bunch of Wahhabi Saudis, right, into Afghanistan, and we're going to bring Arabs to come into Afghanistan and fight against the Soviets. And from there, you have Al-Qaeda. And you have, of course, the Taliban that they ended up backing, really, the creation of these organizations. The Taliban and Al-Qaeda are actually different, by the way. The Taliban, for a very long time, took a very Pashtun nationalist sort of stance. It was not the same as the ideology that Al-Qaeda believed in. Nonetheless, right, scared of the Taliban, scared of Al-Qaeda, scared of ISIS. These are all organizations which are a direct result of the United States. And they've admitted as such at this point. We have all of the documents to prove that they created the foundation of these movements. And you want to go back further? Easy. When you had Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, who created this Wahhabi ideology, which the Saudi royal family would go on to use as an excuse to butcher and kill Muslims that didn't agree with specific things in the religion, so that they could call the people around them non-Muslim and justify invading and killing them. What happened with that? Well, the Saudis went and allied with the British because, again, they're fighting non-Muslims. the Ottoman Empire. And this is how Palestine fell. Palestine fell not in whole, but in part. All of that territory that they took from the Ottoman Empire, the British, right? And the French came in, of course, and occupied territory, right? And they split up the region. But a big part of this, of course, is the collaboration of the Arab armies. And what did the Saudis do? The Saudis use the justification that they're fighting non-Muslims and they're siding with the people of the book, which are the British Christians, right? And they justify their fight with that. And then that ideology eventually, which becomes sort of the state ideology of Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf states as well, they adopt this, or they support specific religious figures who push this messaging towards people. They become extra sectarian. They push their sectarianism across the region and lay the foundation for these organizations to exist and their ranks to be filled. They publicly use their television programs in order to encourage people to go and join organizations in Syria, for example. Even if they don't directly say it, that's what they're implying, right? And they stir all of this hatred towards different groups inside of the region. And again, where is this all coming from? The top Arab allies of the West and the West itself are behind all of these crazy kooky groups. The others, Hamas, Hezbollah, these groups, are national liberation movements. They just have an Islamic flavor to it. That's all. They couldn't be more different. But they want you to be obsessed. Oh, look at Spain in a clearly coordinated, effort where tens of thousands of people are pouring into a territory, and it's looks like one of those propaganda movies that's put together by Nigel Farage or something back in the day, right? With UKIP and all of that stuff that used to come out. It couldn't be more, cinematic. And they wanted it to be cinematic, and they wanted to put pressure on Spain specifically because of its stance on Palestine, but also they want to encourage this idea of Muslim invasion, Muslim invasion, Muslim invasion. And it's all to distract you. And if anything, they're the ones that collaborate with them. They're the ones that have found all of these kooky, crazy groups. They're the ones who push this mentality on people. And even give the arguments. Spokespeople for the Israeli military give the arguments against the Shia and against Hamas that you'll hear the same people in Al-Qaeda and Daesh making about Hamas. And the same people, there will be these spokespeople. This is interesting, by the way. I won't play the sound for it. But this was a segment that was done by Israeli Can News, the Channel 11, that was discussing how Ahmed Ashara, or Abu Muhammad al-Julani, as he was known at the time popularly, wanted, apparently, according to this report, he wanted the Israelis to treat his sister. Right? And of course, the Israelis financed like about a dozen Syrian armed groups that they would back inside of Syria. And then they were good friends with these Takfiri groups. And there's a good reason for it. It's always, again, they want to distract you. They want you to hate. They want you to have animosity towards people who are inside of your country. So you turn away from what they're doing. Every single time. They want to distract you with some nonsense. And if you know enough about the region, if you know enough about the history, you can't have that same hateful opinion because it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. And once you actually dig deeper into it, okay, why are all these wars happening? Why are all these people displaced by these groups? Why are these extreme ideologies even still allowed to exist? Where people think in the ways like these Al-Qaeda types. Where does it come from? Who promoted it? Who allied with these people? Oh, it always leads back to the United States, the British, right, and the Israelis. Every single time. It's all interlinked. And the whole point of this is, again, got to drum up all of this hatred to justify what's coming, but they don't have a real plan. There isn't an actual plan on how to deal with what comes next. They don't know how to deal with it because Iran has got them in a position now in the region where Strait of Hormuz is closed. Bab el-Mandeb is on lockdown for the Saudis at the very least. Could be completely closed if Ansar Allah wanted to do it. The Yemeni forces are attacking the Saudi proxies. They're taking out oil and gas infrastructure. The Iraqis are on standby. Hezbollah, of course, are doing some operations here and there defensively against the Israelis, but they're willing to fight. The only options that the United States and the Israelis have is just to send the entire region into a spiral of chaos, and that can't work ultimately. Because there's just not enough, there's no space for them to control it properly. And if Trump makes the stupid decision to actually launch an all-out attack on Iran, to go after all its infrastructure, then we know what that's going to mean. We know why the Israelis publicly, Bezalel Smotrich was saying, oh, yeah, it's best if the US just fight with the Iranians and do this low-level, low-intensity warfare, because they don't want to get hit. Right? They would rather this fighting been done on their behalf. And if there's a big war that comes, again, the US has no way out. So the Trump administration has a position now where damned if you do, damned if you don't, because he can't fight back against the Israel lobby. We know that. He's just pathetic and weak. And he also doesn't want to go and launch this attack, or at least he's delayed it for many, many, many months. I mean, the initial ceasefire came about because Trump had threatened to go after bridges and power stations and then couldn't do it. And then every so often again, he's talking about bridges and power stations. He's done it like 6, 7 times now that he wants to go after these targets. And he just simply, like, he's not, like, he's got no plan. And they might try and stir chaos and go to full chaos, but it's not looking good. And he has a limited amount of time because those strategic reserves of the United States are getting dangerously low, and they will continue to get lower and lower. So with that being said, we'll continue to follow everything, all of the developments on the ground, what's happening with the armed struggle on all the different fronts. Until then, everybody, please, if you have got this far into the video, do hit that like button, do hit that bell if you're subscribed. If you're not subscribed and you're watching on YouTube, please do subscribe. Comments help us out massively in the algorithm. We're fighting against the algorithm here, so we really do appreciate your thoughts. And also, we are looking for 300 new members. So if you enjoy what you see here, you enjoy watching these breakdowns, and also the footage, the maps, everything that you get, and the analysis here, then please do consider joining us on Patreon, or our YouTube membership also is open. So thank you to everyone for watching, and we will be back same place, same time on Thursday.